Let's talk, though, now to Dominic Grieve, who is, of course, the chair of the Intelligence and Securities Committee. The report has come out today in all the newspapers, particularly well produced in The Guardian, that spy chiefs and British ministers are facing new calls to explain their inexcusable actions. Jack Straw, in particular, is being accused of being, at the very least, misleading about some of the things that he might have known or should have known during post 9/11 sort of rendition and torture scenarios. Let's talk to Dominic Grieve now. Dominic, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Now, this doesn't make very comfortable reading for Jack Straw, or indeed anyone involved in British government at that particular time. Is anything going to happen as a result of this report?
Firstly, I think we've got to be clear. I think it doesn't make comfortable reading for those who were exercising authority at the time. But I'm certainly, and the purpose of the report was not to pass judgment on individuals. The purpose of the report was to identify where we thought the system had failed and where improvements were needed. So I think we need to be clear about that. That was the purpose of this report. And of course, the report couldn't be conclusive because we weren't able to interview the witnesses we wanted to interview. So we had to publish the report based on looking at the documents and discussions with current ministers and current heads of the agencies.
And surely, though, there, Dominic, one of the lessons you would wish to learn, or not you personally, but us as a nation would wish to learn, is that people should cooperate with these types of inquiries in order for them to be done properly.
As we were asked as a committee, admittedly it was my predecessor, not me, to carry out this inquiry, I'm very sorry that we were not given all the resources we needed and the access we needed to finish it. That is something which the committee collectively has expressed both its displeasure and disappointment. And Dominic, we have to go along with the rules that we operate under.
Just so we're clear for our listeners, and we touched on this earlier in the programme before you joined us, my understanding is that you asked for 24 witnesses and you got 4, and it was Downing Street who blocked those witnesses helping your inquiry. Why did they block it, and what was their excuse?
Downing Street's explanation for this was that they felt that they had not envisaged, they said, that when we carried out the inquiry, we would be able to interview such witnesses. Their argument was that an ordinary parliamentary select committee only has access to ministers and very senior officials. And the people we were asking to see were individuals who had been at a more junior level because we needed them to come and see us, we felt, in order to fill in the gaps in the documents, so as we could understand better what was going on the ground and in London at the time these events were unfolding. And it was the refusal to allow that which brought our inquiry effectively to an end. Our argument was that actually when the inquiry was set up, it was we took the view that we had been promised that we would have a larger amount of access than a select committee would normally have, and that was one of the terms on which we'd agreed to take on this inquiry.
And Dominic, as a parliamentarian and a defender of Parliament and democracy, I mean, don't you pull your hair out when Downing Street does things like this? Because it defeats the purpose of the inquiry. And one of the purposes of the inquiry is surely to win back some of the lost trust that the establishment has lost over the last decade or so because of these situations. And it's shooting itself in the foot.
I agree, and I think that if we'd been allowed to conclude the inquiry in the way we wanted, I think it would have enabled us to produce a more authoritative and possibly final report on this matter. So, yes, I am very disappointed about it, particularly in view of the amount of work we've had to put into what's a historic inquiry, which is something slightly unusual and a bit outside our normal area of work. No, it's a serious disappointment, and I think it was also a mistake. I've made that quite clear on numerous occasions to colleagues, including the Prime Minister.
Do you think that as a result of what you have published, though, that you could predict or you could say with any degree of certainty that this wouldn't happen again if the same situation occurred?
We've got to understand that there are now systems in place which are entirely different from what there was in 2001 to 2004, and which ought to prevent such a recurrence. And we looked at that in our second report, and we've said that, broadly speaking, we think that system is working well. We have also made some recommendations for how it might be improved, which is exactly what my committee is there to do. But broadly speaking, the system set up at the very end of Gordon Brown's administration and carried on by David Cameron when he became Prime Minister has introduced a completely new system and I think an effective system for ensuring that where there are areas where cooperating with other intelligence agencies might lead to torture or inhuman and degrading treatment, there is a system in place for evaluating whether that cooperation should continue or not.
Can you explain this particular statement from Jack Straw as a result of what you know now, in which he said in 2005 to a Commons committee, unless we all start to believe in conspiracy theories and that the officials are lying, that I am lying, that behind this there is some kind of secret state which is in league with some dark forces in the United States, there simply is no truth in the claims that the UK has been involved in rendition. I mean, that's barefaced lie, isn't it?
I'm not going to say that. We have shown in our report a number of things. Firstly, that the UK was involved in rendition. There's absolutely no doubt about that. We agreed to finance some rendition operations, and we appear to be oblivious on occasion of the consequences of what that rendition operation would lead to. There is no documentary evidence to suggest that ministers in that period were being alerted to these operations, although in one case there is clear evidence that an operation was signed off by the then Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw.
Right.
I can't, however, comment one way or another as to what he thought he was doing when he did that. And that's a matter on which the committee can't answer that question.
And Dominic, you're in a slightly unique position because not your job, your very important job chairing this committee is obviously looking at and to some effect criticising the government when they're dealing with these things. But you've also been Attorney General, which of course is one of the most important roles on the other side of the fence from within the government when dealing with these types of issues. And we all know what kind of pressure the Attorney General during the Iraq War came under. With those two hats that you've worn in your parliamentary career, do you have a better understanding of how these things have happened in the past, how rendition was allowed to happen?
I can understand how the government system can be placed under a great deal of pressure in decision-making terms on ethical issues and legal issues, particularly in a time of emergency and when people are trying to save lives, for example, and are concerned about possible loss of life in the United Kingdom. I understand that very well as a past attorney. But equally, you need to have systems in place to make sure that you act lawfully. And I think the problem between 2001 and 2004 is that there were no such systems in place. There was an emergency which started a massive military and intelligence operation first in Afghanistan and then Iraq, and no systems were put in place for trying to ensure that the United Kingdom's public statements to which we adhere and try to fulfill, that we will act lawfully and not practice torture or be involved in torture, were in fact adhered to. And the difficulty was that the partner with whom we were operating had torn up its own rule book. And that was where the origin of the problem came from.
And would you also agree with Craig Murray, who I think gave evidence to your inquiry, but certainly you'll be aware of him, the former ambassador to Uzbekistan and whistleblower, that he said that his belief is that a lot of politicians get bamboozled or get enamoured by the sort of glamour of the security services or maybe the military generals and don't question them because they're slightly in thrall.
That may happen. It's true that I think we have in our country good intelligence services, and in the period that I was Attorney General from 2010 onwards, ones who tried to uphold very high ethical standards. I was always impressed by what they did. But you may be right that when it comes to a period of national emergency, it may be easy for politicians to be, whether bamboozled is the right word, but to simply not ask the questions. And perhaps sometimes it may be convenient not to ask the questions, because by not asking the question, you're not going to get an answer.
See no evil, hear no evil.
It's going to put you on the spot and force you to make some difficult decisions, which may have political repercussions.